Ladies and gentlemen,
They say the next big thing is here.
the Steve Warnicki Show.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for being with us this week. I am Steve Warnicki. We've got the book signing in Fort Lauderdale coming up Saturday, November the 4th. Yes, 3 to 5 at Switchbox Coffee Roasters in Fort Lauderdale, just off North Dixie Highway. We hope to see you there Saturday. Also, stay tuned at stevewarnicki.com. We've got information about the Tampa Book Fair and Miami Book Fair also coming up in November. Great chances to meet me, get a signed copy of your book, and say hello. Can't wait to see all of you there. This week, I'm a little, I hope you'll notice the voice is a little bit hoarse. It's not a puberty thing. I just have a little under the weather this week, so bear with me, although I think I may sound a little more manly this week. Yes. All right, so this week's topic I think is super interesting because I have police stuff to talk about, and it also involves statistics. It's like my two favorite things got together there. So there was a study recently released about the use of body-worn police cameras. Now, I'm sure you, at some point over the last 5 years, you've heard talk of police body cams. And even probably if you think back in your recollection, you can think of instances where body cam footage has been released. This was thought necessary by police critics after lots of high-profile encounters involving police officers. Some of them were in custody deaths. Some of them were police use of forces. I maintain that most of them were reasonable and appropriate uses of force by police officers that weren't justified in a timely manner by police executives and prosecutors. And by the time they were justified, everybody had already made up their minds and they were moving on to the next catastrophe. The thought was that body cameras would deter police excessive use of force and violence because police would have cameras on them. Therefore, they wouldn't be out doing all of this messed up shit and, they'd be behaving themselves. And therefore, all of these crazy instances would stop. And what did we learn is that it doesn't matter if police are wearing body cameras or not. Criminals are going to act the same. Since the inception of body-worn police cameras, $40 million of taxpayer money has been spent, and 95% of American police departments have in use or are committed to using body cameras. Before I left the department, we actually began using body cameras. I did some videos on them, and it was interesting to be, I was in the public relations division at the time, so we did body camera videos for the citizenry to see what it was all about and to showcase what body cameras were and how the department would be using them. And of course, cops were not happy about the use of body cameras. And you go, aha, that's it. That's because the cops are doing messed up shit. I got them. It's not. I mean, think about it. Think about no matter what you're doing, from the greeter at Walmart to the Starbucks at barista, to an economist, to whatever it is, a weatherman, a columnist, an office job, a real estate agent. Would you really want footage of you all day long? Now, those of you who are already anti-police are going, yeah, but they're the police, they're in the public, they need our... Okay, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be wearing them. I'm just saying try to empathize for a moment, if you would, please, about why police didn't want to wear them. I'm not arguing that a barista at Starbucks should be wearing a body camera. I understand the difference in jobs descriptions and why police officers are fighting a battle about body cams when no one else is. I understand it. But I'm saying for you, just a moment to empathize about what it would be like. Would you really want footage of everything you're doing all day? And that's not to say you're doing anything wrong. Would you want everything you said captured? Did you ever make a personal phone call or be on Facebook when you weren't supposed to? Or did you ever have a day where you weren't as productive as you should be? Of course. We're all human, and that goes no differently for the police. They're probably, and I can recall days where I wasn't as productive. I'm not feeling well, or I was tired, and I didn't go out and burn the candle at both ends, so to speak. My point isn't to argue about body cameras. My point is to say, just for a moment, we have these police officers who are going out every day, putting their lives on the line for complete strangers, responding to major incidents, not driving away from scary shit, but going into it. And I mean, acting bravely. And what we as a society is like, well, we don't really trust you. You put this camera on. We want to see what you're doing. I'm not saying it's not justified. I'm just saying think about how you would feel. A, if you had to wear them at your job. And B, if you were out doing great things every day and contributing to a quality of life that Americans enjoy, doing a thankless job, and people are going, here, put this camera on. We want to see everything you're doing. Cops were saying like, oh, well, I have to turn this on when I'm taking a shit. Now, people, obviously, departments came up with rules about when you had to have them on and when you didn't. Different departments were different, but some of the things you probably didn't think about as a citizen is the cost of these cameras are exorbitant and the storage issues. I mean, we do this podcast here. We have a couple cameras going, and the raw footage that we download onto the computer is so big that the finished product, never mind all of the different camera angles, because they're each their own, taking up their own space, the audio's space, right? The finished product that we're uploading into YouTube is usually between 1.5 and 3 gigabytes of storage. And you're talking about a 20-minute podcast. Where is it you're going to store 8, 10-hour shifts every day in a police department like Denver with almost 1,500 cops, and they have to upload the footage because you can't have them messing with it. You can't have people being able to delete the footage, right? So they dock their cameras, at least where I worked in Denver before I left, they were docking their cameras and uploaded it to a cloud. That's a lot of space. That's a lot of money. How long do you keep the video for? Because if you keep it for a year, that's one expense. If you want to keep it for 5 years, now you got to have 5 times that amount. What about privacy issues? Think about you've been victimized. Your house has been broken into. You've been sexually assaulted. You've been beaten up. You've been run over. Whatever. You want footage of that available to the public where you're disheveled and crying, or you're angry at your spouse and you're screaming, or you're embarrassed because something embarrassing's happened to you, or you're in your underwear at your house and you've just been victimized and your spouse has punched you and given you a black eye and you're bleeding. Do you want this footage all over? Do you want anybody to be able to view it? That's an issue. I don't want footage of me when the police come to my house. I don't want that footage available. So when do you release it? How do you release it? You can't make all body cam footage available to the public. And with X amount of officers, 1,000 plus officers, how are you going to review all of these moments? So now you have privacy issues that you have to take into consideration. And when and how to release this footage. These are all monumental discussions and problems that came along with body cameras that police departments are having to figure out during the implementation of these that you probably didn't think about. Now think back to the body cam footage you've seen over the last few years. With very few exceptions, for the most part, it's exonerated police officers. It has shown that they really were facing a threat, that their use of force was reasonable and appropriate for the vast majority of times. And then on Friday, October 20th, a study is released, the biggest study to date by the DC police involving body cameras. And I call it the Friday news dump. It was covered by the New York Times, the Washington Post. I saw it in Forbes and some other places. I saw some of it, but Friday news doesn't typically get the coverage because going in, that's when you release bad news that you don't want anybody to know about going into the weekend, because everybody's going to forget about it on the weekend. Did they do this on a Friday on purpose? Because this study was one of the most positive things that's happened for police officers in the news in the last several years, and it got the Friday news dump situation. Coincidence? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But certainly we didn't hear late night talk show hosts commenting about it. We didn't see panels of experts on every news network impaneled giving us their every last opinion they had based on this study. We heard a little blurb about it. Maybe. Did you hear a blurb about this study? I'm going to tell you about it. Before this DC study, one of the only things that was used was a tiny study back in 2012 done in Rialto, California, that only used 54 police officers. And that study found in favor of body cameras. That study is cited oftentimes by people and was used by judges, and also is on Axon's website, which is a company that was formerly known as Taser International, who has sold over 300,000 units of these body cameras to police departments. So certainly they don't want body cameras to go away. So now let me tell you about the biggest study of its kind. Over 2,200 officers were involved from the DC police. The primary focus was documented use of force in civilian complaints. Those were the two alleged benefits of body cameras. That citizen complaints would come down and use of force would go down. The presence of body-worn cameras, the study found, had no detectable effect on any of the measured outcomes. No detectable average effect on documented use of forces. No detectable average effect on civilian complaints. No detectable outcome on police discretion involving disorderly conduct arrests. They were looking to see, are cops just getting pissed at people and using their discretionary arrests for like disorderly conduct? In Denver, we would have called it interference. Are those going to go way down because cops won't arrest people? And no, they didn't. It didn't have any effect. It was interesting. Some reactions. The DC police chief, Peter Newsom, said the cameras didn't make a difference. That's not what we anticipated. Maybe we were doing the right thing in the first place, he said. Sergeant Matthew Mall, chairman of the DC Police Labor Union, said he too expected bigger impact from the cameras. His quote, "I honestly thought complaints would have come down. We're spending all this money to realize that everything is the same." Monica Hopkins Maxwell is the executive director of the ACLU, and she said cameras were, quote, "not a panacea," and that only more emphasis on initiatives like community policing, data collection, and better training would help build goodwill. Professor David Harris, the New York Times quoted him from the University of Pittsburgh, saying that the impact of body cameras will remain a disappointment to many people, given the hype surrounding them, and that good or bad, the footage from the body cams goes viral on the internet. Harris said, quote, "We were sold on the idea that these cameras were going to bring a brand new accountability to policing, and that isn't entirely what's happened." Now, there's more studies coming out, one from the NYPD coming out. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But cops and executives in police departments knew this when the implementation began. The talk in the ranks was, hey, this is going to help us 99% of the time. That's what we told the cops. You guys know you're doing the right thing day in and day out. This is going to help you 99% of the time. I believed it then. And now we're seeing the first evidence of it coming out. And for the most part, it just makes sense. Think about it. In volatile situations, when there's adrenaline and emergencies, people are fleeing from the police, smashing into cars, shooting at each other, facing life and death situations with people with edged weapons and batons. There was just one released the other day where a cop's getting beat with his own baton in a parking lot. Body cam footage. Are you thinking about the fact that you have a camera on? Of course you're not. Is the bad guy who just wants to get away and not go to jail, does he care, notice, give a shit that the police officer has a body camera? No. So it's the mundane contacts that maybe you're being nicer when you're at the 7-Eleven when you pull somebody over for speeding. But the volatile situations, nobody, because of the stress factor involved in these, is even aware or remembers the camera. And of course, there are instances where body cams have incriminated or embarrassed officers, but they're very rare. They're the exception. They're just like we thought in the police ranks. They're the 1% of body cam footage, if not less. Sure, there's been instances where police forgot to turn on body cameras, and now they're talking. But think about what I was saying earlier. Like, how do you get in a life and death situation where someone's ramming your police car, coming at you with a baton? You think, I better start this camera, especially when you're not used to it. I mean, yeah, you can get into a muscle memory thing. They're talking now about having the body cameras activate when guns are removed from holsters. Okay. Are we going to spend more money on activated body cams that remove from holsters to show us more of the same? Is it worth the cost to you as the taxpayer? Is that worth it? Or are you now willing more to trust the police officers who've been doing the same job all along? There are, and there were, some benefits to using body cams. We've already mentioned it exonerated a ton of police officers. It justified use of force among police officers. But I bet you didn't know it led to more accurate investigations. There was an independent record of cases and scenes that might not have been there otherwise. It actually can increase and have an effect in the courtroom. In guilty verdicts, it's no longer he said, she said, cop versus bad guy. You've got independent footage. I don't think the answer is more body cameras simply because of the cost and a lot of the issues that we're facing. I'll tell you what I think the answer is. The answer is police departments need to do a better job of communicating from the beginning. Now, listen, I spent some time in the public relations division at the Denver Police Department. I was a public information officer, so I responded and did interviews with the media. When I would get to a police scene to talk to the media, I would have to meet with detectives, and a lot of times I'd have to talk to really higher ups, sometimes even the chief, the deputy chiefs, whatever. And they would tell me this is what you can say, and it was very limited. And people don't understand why the police aren't saying a lot in the beginning of an investigation. There's lots of reasons for this. You can't say a lot early on because there's a lot of evidentiary issues. You can't say shit that only the suspect knows. You're going to ruin the prosecution. If you have a bad guy out on the town who knows what caliber of gun, who's the only person that knows that? Witnesses, the suspect, and if the victim's still alive, right? So I would show up and be like, oh, the victim is shot. We couldn't get into caliber, how many times, where the body is. Because if you put that out for public consumption, then when you arrest somebody, the whole community knows all of those facts. So it doesn't work, and you jeopardize your prosecution later by releasing facts early on. So police departments have, at the peril of their own reputations, have held back information for the good of the prosecution. But the public doesn't understand that. They think they're just being dicey. Well, they're just dancing around the facts. It's an ongoing investigation. We can't comment. Why do you hear that? Because it's an ongoing investigation. The police departments have to be concerned with the court process. That's what police departments are ultimately trying to get is convictions in court. They can't run themselves based on public perception. They're trying to get a conviction. Having said that, I think there's more police departments can do in the beginning to communicate. You can talk about policy. I just used this example recently in the Miami Beach shooting. We had a lady who crashed into police cars. I did a podcast on it on stevewarnicky.com. And we didn't hear from the police department. It's an ongoing investigation. And I said, sure, the police department doesn't have to come out the next day and said, we find the officer did correctly. It's a long investigation. It's going to take months. But they can come out and say, here's our policy about shooting into moving vehicles. Here's our policy about when we're going to use deadly force. And when you have instances where, let's face it, there's a lot of instances in police work that are a lot more cut and dry than others. There's some that are like, this is a nightmare. We're going to be sorting this shit out for weeks, months. And there's some stuff that's like, this is going to be a pretty quick one. It's kind of open and shut. And if you have video, like in the Miami Beach shooting, where you have this woman with a large group of people around smashing into a police car, she's already been in a bunch of wrecks. And then she runs over a cop trying to get away, and the cop shoot her. I mean, I'm not saying you have to come out the next day, but when the video evidence is so good that you can pretty much see, and a reasonable person to go, well, that looks pretty reasonable, you could still come out as a police executive and go, listen, there's an investigation. It's gonna take some time, but based on the video, which is pretty clear, looked to me like this woman was in extreme danger to everybody, right? I've talked about transparency in government over and over and over again. And it's there, but it's bureaucracy, so it takes a long time for it to materialize. And by that time, people have already made their minds up. And I was very frustrated as a public information officer from time to time on big instances because I wanted to say more. We had more. We knew more. And there were things we could say about these kinds of cases in general. Or we have good evidence, so we could come out earlier. Or this is the policy. But my boss explained to me at the time that we would rather take a black eye to make the prosecution of a suspect successful later on versus improving our appearance in the public. And I think if police departments, they can't lose sight of that. police departments are there to arrest the criminals, not just for the night, but to hold people to account and to bring them to justice. And once people understand this process, and there's an interest in this. Why do you think police shows and police movies have always had really good viewership? Because there's a general interest in police work. So now it's time to get interested in not the Law and Order version, not the Hollywood version of police work, but the real one. You want to know about it? You want to see Ice Cube solving crimes, or do you want to know what really happens out there? Because there's lots of stuff that I'm trying to get out that really will help the public perception of the police that are already doing a good job. And thanks to the DC police for pointing that out in their study. I look forward to more of these studies to come. All right, so I want to thank everybody for being here this week. We're over at stevewarnicki.com. I'll be feeling better next week, I'm hoping. But thanks for everything. We'll see you at the book signing November 4th in Fort Lauderdale. Head to stevewarnicki.com for all kinds of more details, articles, and podcasts. See you later.